After dedicating 6 years of her life to her job, Emily secures the deal of a lifetime, $1 million contract that could transform her struggling company. But instead of recognition, her greedy boss, Mr. Drake, steals her credit and pockets an illicit kickback. Furious and betrayed, Emily uncovers a web of fraud and deception that spans years, implicating Mr. Drake in crimes far greater than she imagined. Armed with undeniable evidence, she teams up with a relentless journalist to expose his corruption, triggering his swift downfall. But just as Emily begins to savor her victory, an unexpected twist flips her world upside down. Accusations surface, painting her as an accomplice to Mr. Drake's schemes, and a hidden enemy emerges, threatening to destroy her reputation. Caught in a web of lies, blackmail, and betrayal, Emily must fight not only for justice but for her own survival. In this thrilling tale of ambition, greed, and retribution, she learns the hard way that revenge comes with a price, and the truth is never as simple as it seems. I've always believed that loyalty and hard work pay off. Growing up, my parents drilled it into me that if you put your head down, focus, and stay true to your values, good things will come your way. That's why I threw everything I had into my job when I landed it fresh out of college. I wasn't just a cog in the machine, I was part of something bigger, or so I thought. I wanted to climb the ladder, make my mark, and build a career I could be proud of. The company was a mid-sized tech firm with big ambitions. It wasn't flashy like the startups you see in Silicon Valley, but it had potential, and I wanted to be part of its rise. My boss, Mr. Drake, was the face of the company, charismatic, polished, and full of promises. He had this way of making you feel like you were indispensable while subtly reminding you that you weren't. "You've got a bright future here, Emily," he'd say, his white teeth flashing in that too-perfect grin. "Stick with me, and you'll go places." I wanted to believe him. For 6 years, I gave that company everything I had. I stayed late to meet deadlines, stepped in to help coworkers who were falling behind, and took on extra responsibilities without ever asking for more money. It wasn't just about the paycheck, it was about proving my worth, about earning the recognition I knew I deserved. But recognition never seemed to come. It wasn't like I expected a standing ovation every time I closed a deal or finished a project. But after 6 years of grinding, I figured I'd earned more than a pat on the back. Still, I kept my head down, telling myself that my time would come. And then, out of nowhere, I landed the deal of the century. The client was Horizon Tech, a powerhouse in the industry. They were the kind of client that could put our company on the map and double, maybe even triple, our revenue. It wasn't easy to win them over. I spent weeks preparing the pitch, perfecting every slide, and rehearsing my delivery until I could do it in my sleep. When the day came, I walked into that boardroom with nerves of steel and left with a signed contract. The office was buzzing when I got back. Everyone knew what that deal meant for the company. My co-workers congratulated me, their excitement contagious. For the first time in years, I felt like all my hard work had been worth it. I wasn't just another employee, I was a game changer. That's why it hit me like a slap in the face when Mr. Drake called me into his office the next day. "Emily, great work on the Horizon Tech deal," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like a king addressing his subject. "This is a huge win for us." "Thank you," I said, sitting up straighter. I waited for him to mention a bonus or some kind of reward, but he just kept smiling that rehearsed, corporate smile. "So, here's the thing," he continued. "We're a little tight on budgets right now. I can't offer you a bonus this quarter, but don't worry, I'll make it up to you next year. In the meantime, I want you to know how much I appreciate your hard work. You're the future of this company, Emily. Keep it up." I stared at him, my stomach sinking. Tight budgets? That deal alone was going to bring in enough profit to fund the entire department for a year. And now he was telling me to wait until next year for something I'd earned yesterday. "But," I started, my voice faltering. "Mr. Drake, this deal is..." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. Emily, don't get caught up in money. This is about building your reputation. Trust me, your time will come. I nodded, biting back the words I wanted to say. Arguing with him wouldn't get me anywhere, and I couldn't afford to jeopardize my job. But as I left his office, a bitter taste filled my mouth. This wasn't about budgets. This was about control. He wanted me to feel grateful for crumbs while he feasted on the entire meal. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I watched as Mr. Drake paraded my success around like it was his own. During a company-wide meeting, he stood at the front of the room, smiling like a proud father as he talked about the incredible leadership that made the Horizon Tech deal possible. Not once did he mention my name. "Great job, Emily," my coworkers whispered to me after the meeting, oblivious to the humiliation simmering beneath my polite smile. And then it got worse. One day, I was sitting at my desk, buried in emails, when I accidentally opened one that wasn't meant for me. My name had been included in the thread by mistake, and as I skimmed the message, my heart stopped. It was from Horizon Tech's legal team, confirming a $50,000 consulting fee deposited into Mr. Drake's personal account. I read the email 3 times, my hands shaking. A consulting fee? For what? I was the one who'd done all the work. I was the one who'd spent weeks preparing the pitch, convincing Horizon Tech to sign with us. And now, here was Mr. Drake, pocketing a kickback for himself, using my efforts as leverage. It wasn't just unfair, it was theft. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but something stopped me. I thought about all the times he'd dismissed me, all the times he'd taken credit for my work and left me with nothing. Marching into his office wouldn't solve anything, it would just give him another opportunity to talk his way out of it. No, I needed to be smarter than that. If I wanted justice, I couldn't just go after him. I had to take him down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last 6 years in my mind. Every late night, every missed vacation, every moment I'd sacrificed for the company, what had it all been for? To line Mr. Drake's pockets while I scraped by, hoping for a bonus that would never come? I thought about the email, the $50,000, and the smug look on his face during that meeting. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let him get away with it. If Mr. Drake thought he could steal from me, he was about to learn the hard way that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. I was done being the loyal employee. It was time to fight back. For the first few days, I wasn't sure where to begin. Taking down someone like Mr. Drake wasn't a small feat. He wasn't just my boss, he was the CEO of the company, with connections, resources, and an ego that made him feel untouchable. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. If anything, it made me more determined. The first thing I did was create a folder on my personal laptop, password protected, of course. I named it something innocuous, vacation ideas, just in case anyone ever came snooping. That folder became my arsenal, the place where I carefully stored every piece of evidence I could find. Emails, invoices, screenshots of transactions, anything that hinted at wrongdoing went into that folder. I knew the $50,000 consulting fee was just the tip of the iceberg. People like Mr. Drake didn't get greedy overnight. If he was willing to pocket kickbacks on a major deal like Horizon Tech, chances were he'd been doing it for years. All I had to do was find the proof. I started small. During lunch breaks, I'd quietly search through old email chains, looking for anything that seemed out of place. I found more than I expected: memos about special consulting services that didn't exist, expense reports that didn't add up, and vague invoices paid to companies I'd never heard of. Each new discovery felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, revealing a bigger picture of fraud and corruption. But emails and invoices weren't enough. I needed something more concrete. That's when I decided to start snooping in Mr. Drake's office. It wasn't as risky as it sounds. Mr. Drake had a habit of leaving the office for long lunches or disappearing early on Fridays. I knew his assistant, Marla, had a standing lunch date with her sister every Wednesday, leaving his office completely unattended for at least an hour. The first time I slipped in, my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. His office was pristine, almost unnervingly so, with everything in its place. I started with the drawers of his desk, careful not to disturb anything. Most of what I found was mundane: office supplies, paperwork, a stash of granola bars. But then I hit the jackpot. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of folders, was a leather-bound planner. It looked ordinary at first glance, but when I flipped through it, my breath caught. It wasn't a planner at all, it was a ledger. And not just any ledger. This was Mr. Drake's personal record of every under-the-table deal he'd made over the past 3 years. Each page was a detailed account of kickbacks, bribes, and fraudulent transactions. He'd even jotted down notes about how he'd covered his tracks: false invoices, offshore accounts, shell companies. It was all there, written in his own handwriting, like he'd never imagined anyone would find it. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of every page. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with exhilaration. I had him. Still, I knew better than to rush into action. This wasn't just about exposing Mr. Drake, I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to make sure that when he fell, there was no coming back. And to do that, I needed more than just evidence. I needed allies. My first thought was to go to HR or the CFO, but I quickly dismissed the idea. HR worked for the company, not the employees, and the CFO was too close to Mr. Drake to be trusted. No, I needed someone outside the company, someone who could blow this story wide open. That's when I remembered Sophie. Sophie was a journalist I'd met through a mutual friend at a networking event a few years ago. We weren't close, but I remembered her mentioning that she specialized in exposing corporate scandals. If anyone could help me take down Mr. Drake, it was her. I reached out to her with a carefully worded email, explaining that I had information about potential fraud at my company and asking if she'd be interested in hearing more. Her reply came within the hour. Absolutely. Let's talk. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the other side of town. I'd printed out some of the evidence I'd collected and brought it with me, but I was careful not to reveal too much at first. Sophie listened intently as I explained the situation, her pen scribbling furiously in her notebook. "This is big," she said when I finished. "But you're going to need to be careful. People like your boss don't go down without a fight. If he finds out what you're doing, he'll do everything he can to discredit you." "I'm ready for that," I said, though the truth was, I wasn't sure if I was. The thought of Mr. Drake retaliating made my stomach churn, but I couldn't let fear stop me. Sophie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Here's what we'll do. Keep gathering evidence. The more you have, the harder it'll be for him to wiggle out of this. And when you're ready, I'll write the story. But you need to be absolutely sure you've got all your bases covered before we go public. One wrong move, and this could backfire on both of us." I nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. Sophie was right, I needed to be thorough. Mr. Drake had spent years building his empire of lies, and I wasn't going to tear it down with half measures. Over the next few weeks, I doubled down on my efforts. I went through old meeting notes, reviewed every project I'd ever worked on, and even reached out to former employees who'd left the company under suspicious circumstances. Some of them were hesitant to talk, but a few shared stories that made my blood boil, stories of bonuses withheld, promotions promised and never delivered, and questionable financial practices that no one dared question. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Mr. Drake's greed went far deeper than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just about me or the Horizon Tech deal. This was about a man who had built his career on exploiting others, taking credit for their work while lining his own pockets. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The tension at the office was unbearable. Every time I saw Mr. Drake strolling around with his smug grin, it took everything in me not to scream. Every meeting, every casual encounter in the hallway felt like a game of cat and mouse, with him oblivious to the fact that I was quietly dismantling his empire. My folder of evidence had grown exponentially, and Sophie was checking in every few days to keep me focused. But as much as I tried to keep calm, I couldn't shake the anxiety creeping into my every move. What if I'd overlooked something? What if he got suspicious? Every time my phone buzzed or someone called my name, I felt my stomach drop, convinced the walls were closing in. Then, one Friday, everything changed. It started with an all-hands meeting Mr. Drake called at the last minute. He was beaming as he stood at the front of the conference room, congratulating the team on record-breaking numbers. I knew those numbers were mostly thanks to the Horizon Tech deal I had closed, but of course, he didn't mention that. Instead, he launched into a long, self-congratulatory speech about his visionary leadership. I was barely listening until he said something that made my blood run cold. "Now, I know there's been some chatter lately," he said, his tone casual, but his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Rumors about certain decisions I've made, accusations flying around, completely unfounded, of course. I just want to remind everyone that this company is built on trust and integrity. And I won't tolerate anyone trying to undermine that." His gaze lingered on me for a second too long. I froze. Did he know? Was this his way of warning me off? I kept my expression neutral, nodding along like everyone else, but my mind was racing. If he was on to me, I had to move faster. After the meeting, I texted Sophie, "We need to talk. Urgent." We met that evening at the same coffee shop, but this time, I wasn't calm. I was panicked, my words tumbling over each other as I explained what had happened. "He knows," I said, gripping my coffee cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Or at least, he suspects something. I don't know how, but I can feel it." Sophie leaned back, her expression calm but serious. "If he's throwing out vague threats, it's probably because he doesn't have anything concrete yet. He's fishing, trying to scare whoever's behind this into stopping. But what if he finds out it's me? What if he turns the whole company against me?" She gave me a sympathetic look. "That's always a risk in these situations, Emily. But you have to remember, you have the power here. You have the evidence. As long as you stay smart and careful, he won't know what hit him." Her words steadied me, but only slightly. I'd come too far to back down now, but the fear of being exposed was a constant weight on my chest. We decided it was time to escalate. Sophie suggested involving a third party, someone with legal authority who could validate the evidence and protect me if things went south. She had a contact at a regulatory agency that specialized in corporate fraud, and after some convincing, I agreed to let her reach out to them. Over the next week, I worked with Sophie and her contact, a sharp-eyed investigator named Marcus. He didn't ask too many questions about my motives, which I appreciated. He only cared about the evidence and how to make it stick. "Your boss is bold," Marcus said during one of our calls. "Leaving behind this kind of paper trail. That's amateur hour. If this goes public, he won't just lose his job, he could face criminal charges." The thought of Mr. Drake in handcuffs was satisfying, but it also made me nervous. This was bigger than I'd anticipated. If it went wrong, the consequences could be devastating, not just for me, but for everyone involved. By the end of the week, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive report based on the evidence I'd provided. Sophie was already drafting her article, and we agreed to release everything simultaneously, a 1-2 punch that would leave Mr. Drake with no time to react. The plan was set, but the waiting was excruciating. Every day at work felt like walking a tightrope. I avoided Mr. Drake as much as possible, but it was impossible to avoid the tension. He seemed more on edge than usual, snapping at his assistant and glaring at anyone who crossed him. It was only a matter of time before he exploded. And explode he did. It happened during another company-wide meeting. Mr. Drake was giving one of his typical speeches about leadership and growth when someone raised a hand. "Mr. Drake, I wanted to ask about the recent expense reports. There seemed to be some discrepancies." The question was innocent enough, but it hit a nerve. Mr. Drake's face darkened, and he cut the employee off mid-sentence. "Discrepancies? Are you questioning my integrity?" he snapped, his voice rising. The room fell silent. Everyone looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as Mr. Drake launched into a tirade about loyalty and professionalism. I sat there, staring at the table, my heart pounding. When the meeting finally ended, I knew the time had come. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. I sent Sophie a single message: "Do it." The next morning, chaos erupted. The first thing I saw when I woke up was Sophie's article, already trending online. Tech CEO accused of multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, exclusive investigation. The headline sent a shiver down my spine. I opened the article and skimmed through it, even though I already knew what it said. Sophie had laid out everything, every kickback, every fraudulent transaction, every lie Mr. Drake had told to cover his tracks. My contributions were anonymous, but the evidence was undeniable. By the time I got to the office, the place was in turmoil. Employees were huddled in groups, whispering and checking their phones. Mr. Drake's office door was closed, but I could hear him shouting on the phone, his voice loud and frantic. An hour later, security arrived. We all watched as Mr. Drake was escorted out of the building, his face red with anger. He tried to keep his composure, but it was clear he'd been blindsided. For years, he'd built his reputation on lies, and now, in a matter of hours, it had all come crashing down. As he passed by my desk, our eyes met. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He just glared at me, his face a mask of fury, before storming out. I felt a strange mix of emotions as I watched him leave. Relief, satisfaction, and even a bit of fear. But most of all, I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering when my hard work would be stolen or dismissed. The fallout was far from over, but one thing was certain: Mr. Drake was finished. And I had made sure of it. The chaos didn't end after Mr. Drake was escorted out. In fact, it was only the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of whispered conversations, emergency board meetings, and a flurry of emails from HR. The company's official statement was vague, citing ethical concerns as the reason for Mr. Drake's sudden departure, but everyone knew the truth. Sophie's article had gone viral, and news outlets were scrambling to pick up the story. Investors were panicking, stocks were plummeting, and employees were left wondering if the company would even survive. But while the rest of the office was drowning in uncertainty, I felt oddly calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even nervous. I'd done what needed to be done, and now it was out of my hands. Or so I thought. The storm hit on a quiet Wednesday morning, a week after Mr. Drake's public downfall. I was at my desk, sipping coffee and sifting through emails, when my phone buzzed with an alert. It was from Sophie. "Call me. Now." I stepped outside and dialed her number, my stomach tightening. She picked up on the first ring. "Emily," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "There's another story breaking," she said. "A competitor of mine is publishing something today, about you." "Me?" My voice caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" "They're claiming you were involved in Mr. Drake's schemes. That you were his accomplice." I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "That's ridiculous," I said, my voice rising. "I exposed him." I know," Sophie cut in. "But they're saying you were part of it and turned on him to save yourself. They're citing anonymous sources, Emily. It's bad." My legs felt weak, and I leaned against the wall for support. Who would say that? Why would anyone believe it? Because you were close to the Horizon Tech deal, Sophie said carefully. You were the one who secured it. And now that people know about the kickback, it's easy for them to spin it like you were in on it. I clenched my fists, anger and panic flooding me. This is insane. How do I prove it's not true? Sophie hesitated. You might not have to. If the story gets enough traction, they'll investigate it. But here's the thing, they'll investigate everything. Every email, every meeting you've been a part of. If they find even the slightest hint of impropriety, they'll use it against you. I felt like the floor was crumbling beneath me. But I didn't do anything wrong. Emily, Sophie said gently, are you sure? Her question haunted me for the rest of the day. Was I sure? Of course, I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't taken any bribes or kickbacks. But I couldn't help replaying the past 6 years in my mind, wondering if there was anything I'd done, even unintentionally, that could be twisted into something incriminating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop, scrolling through news articles and social media posts about the scandal. Some people were praising me for exposing Mr. Drake, but others were already speculating about my involvement. And then I saw it, a new post from a pseudonymous account claiming to have inside information about me. The post accused me of orchestrating the entire scheme, claiming I'd been the mastermind behind Mr. Drake's fraudulent activities and had only exposed him to cover my tracks. I wanted to scream. Who was doing this? And why? Then my phone buzzed. It was an email, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You know the truth." With trembling hands, I opened it. The email was short but chilling. I know everything you've done. If you don't want the world to find out, you'll meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. Hotel Grayson, room 412. Come alone. My blood ran cold. Was this some kind of joke? A prank? Or was it Mr. Drake trying to get back at me? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they wanted me to panic, and it was working. I thought about ignoring it, but something in my gut told me I couldn't. If this person had real information, if they could prove I'd done something wrong, even unintentionally, I needed to know what they had. The next evening, I found myself standing outside room 412 at the Hotel Grayson. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I raised my hand to knock, hesitated, then forced myself to do it. The door opened almost immediately. To my shock, it wasn't Mr. Drake standing there. It was Marla, his assistant. Marla? I asked, completely thrown. She stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. Come in, Emily. We need to talk. I walked in, my mind spinning. The room was small and dimly lit, with a single desk covered in papers. Marla closed the door behind me, locking it. What's going on? I demanded. Why are you doing this? Marla crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Because I'm tired of being ignored. You think you're so righteous, don't you? The hero who brought down the big bad boss. She scoffed. You're no better than him. What are you talking about? I snapped. I didn't do anything wrong. She reached for the stack of papers on the desk and threw them at me. Didn't you? Take a look. I picked up the papers and felt my stomach drop. They were emails, between me and Mr. Drake. Emails from years ago, where I'd discussed client strategies, shared confidential information, and even approved questionable expense reports. I hadn't thought much of them at the time, but now, seeing them laid out like this, they looked damning. These don't mean anything, I said, though my voice wavered. Maybe not, Marla said, smirking. But if you were in my position, would you believe that? Or would you think you were just as complicit as he was? I stared at her, my mind reeling. What do you want from me? She leaned in, her eyes cold. I want a payout. Half of whatever settlement you get from the company. You think I don't know about the hush money they'll throw at you to make this go away? You wouldn't have any of it if it weren't for me keeping my mouth shut all these years. I felt a wave of nausea. You're blackmailing me. Call it what you want, she said, shrugging. But I'm done being the invisible one while people like you and Drake take everything for yourselves. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I knew she had me cornered. Even if the emails didn't prove I was guilty of anything, they were enough to ruin my reputation. Enough to make people doubt me. I stared at her, my hands shaking, and realized I had no choice. The next morning, I walked into the office and handed in my resignation. I told HR I needed a fresh start, but the truth was, I couldn't stay. Not after everything that had happened. I got the settlement, of course, a 6-figure payout that would have felt like a victory under different circumstances. But it wasn't a win. It was just enough to make me disappear quietly, like Mr. Drake and I were two sides of the same coin. As for Marla, I sent her the money. I didn't want to, but I couldn't risk what she might do if I didn't. And now? Now I'm free, but not in the way I'd hoped. Because even though I took down Mr. Drake, I didn't escape unscathed. In the end, revenge has a way of leaving scars, no matter how justified it feels. And sometimes, the biggest betrayal isn't what others do to you. It's what you do to yourself.